Chapter 1, Introduction to Public Speaking. In this chapter, we're going to talk about the benefits of public speaking. We'll look at some communication process models, and we're going to also look at some basic speech competencies that we will dig in a little deeper as the semester continues. So, Chapter 1, let's talk about some benefits of public speaking. The first thing I always want to challenge my students to do is to really think about their goals, their career goals, after they complete their education. And in that, I want you to consider how honing those communication skills, whether it be public communication or interpersonal communication, honing those skills and really developing those skills can really benefit you and help you grow and advance in your careers. And then I always challenge students to think the very step of the process of getting a job, the very first thing you do after you fill out an application is to have an interview. And think about the importance of effective communication in the interview process. Think about the fact that there are many times people that may not necessarily be the most qualified candidate for a job, but they sure do have a way of selling their abilities to the person that's interviewing them, and that really gives someone a leg up in their field and in the interview process when they have the ability to communicate their skills and their talents in an effective way. So to me, communication is just so crucial to not just advancing in your careers, but just getting your foot in the door, just kind of getting started in a career. Public speaking skills allow us to fulfill our responsibilities and gives us opportunities that may arise in our personal and professional lives, and it helps us do these things and fulfill these essential roles with confidence. So I always say, think about it if you're in a team of people, and at work, this happens to me a lot, where we're asked to give a presentation about something or another, and we kind of look around and everybody's like, I don't really want to do that, and that's the one thing I'm like, I'll do it. I'll give the presentation. So you think about if you're the person that feels confident in that area and no one else does, and I'm going to be honest with you, most people do not. If you're the person that feels confident in that area, then your leadership skills will grow, your expertise will grow, because people see you as someone that's willing to step up and someone that's willing to take opportunities as they come to them. So 70% of jobs today involve some form of public speaking. And effective public speaking allows us to participate in a democratic society. I feel like we've seen this a lot over the past year, especially, where our ability to use our voice to stand up for the things that we believe in is crucial in our democratic society. It always has been, but I feel like there are times in history where it kind of comes up and down, and we're living in a time where the ability to use your voice to communicate what's right or wrong or just or unjust is more crucial right now than it has been for a very long time. So we're going to look at some models of communication, and this first model is very simple. It's a linear model. This indicates a one-way process of communication, which we'll talk about more in a minute. Communication is way deeper than this model. So the linear model basically says you have a sender, you have the person that has the message. They choose a channel, they choose a space in which they want to communicate that message, and they're sending that message to a receiver. If you notice with this model, it's not cyclical. There's no return, there's no feedback. And I think we all know as communicators that it is a process, and it's a cyclical process, and it's transactional. So the next model, although it's a little bit more confusing to look at, is an indication of a transactional process. So we're going to look at the terms involved in the communication process model. So first of all, the very first thing we do before we send a message, we have information that we want to send, and then we figure out the correct way to send that message, and that's called encoding. Encoding is the process of taking an idea or a mental image, associating that image with words, and then speaking those words in order to convey a message. So this can be a challenging part. Now, to kind of go back a second, I want us to look at the word process. And what do we know about process? What do we know about a process? We know that a process is multi-step. A process has steps that you need to follow in order to get the end result. If you don't follow those steps correctly, the end result is not what you expected it to be. I always give the example of myself as a baker or a cooker, or baker, either one. No, I'm not great at it. And I'm definitely not good at it if I attempt to multitask. So oftentimes I will have a recipe out, I'll be baking or making something, and then the phone rings. And I think, I can put it on speaker, I can have my conversation, and I can bake a dessert or bake dinner, cook dinner, or whatever. And what typically happens in that is that I miss a step. I get distracted, and I don't follow things step by step like I should have. And the end result, the product, is not what I expected it to be. Does not look like the picture of the HelloFresh card of what the meal should look like. It does not look like the cookies that my mom made when I tried to copy the recipe. So it's not what I was expecting it to be, and so the process failed. So think about the fact that when we communicate, it's always a process. It's multi-step. I fear that oftentimes we as communicators send the message and are like, okay, my part's done. I sent the message. I did my part. Everything else is up to them. And when we do that, we have a lot of miscommunication, and we have a lot of failed information, and we have a lot of failed interactions. So encoding is when you decide to choose the message and you word it the right way for the person you're sending the message to. So I feel like for me, this is the biggest challenge for this is when I'm dealing with children and I want to communicate a message of instructions, and the very first way that I phrase that message or I encode the message, they don't understand. And then I end up a lot of questions with, well, what does this word mean? Or what does this word mean? So then I have to take a step back and say, okay, this is the best way to communicate this message for someone of this age. Or this is the best way to communicate this message of someone of this educational level. And you kind of think of who you're talking about and you encode a message for that person. On the flip side of that, every time we send a message, someone receives it and decodes it. That's the reverse of the process. So every time we send a message, the person that receives it decodes the message. They listen to the words we send, they think about the words that we send, and they turn those words into mental images or meaning for them. So if we go back to the word process and we go back to the fact that things don't always happen successfully when we communicate with others, the decoding process is one way that this happens. So we may think we worded the most perfect message, we use the correct imagery, we describe things to a T, but when the person takes the message and they provide their own meaning to it, they don't come out with what we intended for them to come out with. So that's why it's important that we stay involved in the communication process to make sure that the receiver of the message decoded the message with our intent. So we have communicators, and the communicators are all the people in the interaction or the speech setting. So whether you're the sender or the receiver, you're constantly communicating. If you're not talking, but you're providing nonverbal feedback to the speaker, you're communicating a message to them. So nonverbal behavior is the information we gain from the observation leads to feedback. So in a face-to-face class, for instance, this is much easier because I can communicate a message, I can communicate the content, I can tell by the looks on their faces, I don't think they get it, I need to provide a few more examples, or I can say, okay, they've got it, I can move on. So we kind of watch the people that we're talking to tell, get a gauge of where they are in the communication process. Are they with us? Do they understand what we're saying? Or do we need to kind of rework how we're communicating it? The message involves those verbal and nonverbal behaviors enacted by the communicators that are interpreted with meaning by others. So the message is the content that's being conveyed to the people in the communication process. Like we talked about a second ago, there's the channel. So sometimes the channel can be our problem. Sometimes the channels can be where we fail in communication. The channel is basically the space through which the message travels. So we have to think carefully about this. Depending on the message that we have, we choose the right channel. I don't know about you, I'm probably older than most of you, but oftentimes when I'm texting something and I'll think to myself, this is way too complicated for text. And as much as I don't want to do it, I need to call this person and I need to explain what I'm wanting to say because I don't think it's going to happen successfully through text. Other times I may send a text or an email and I think, I'm going to put this some sarcasm in, and they're going to think it's so funny, and they're going to read the message in exactly the same way I hear it in my head, and that doesn't always work out. And then there's some miscommunication because sarcasm doesn't necessarily translate well when you're doing that through text or email, especially if the person doesn't know you really well. So sometimes if we don't choose the correct channel, then we may have some failures in the communication process. Now, the next part is where I think the majority of our problems happen. Noise. Noise is anything that interferes with the message transmission or reception. And noise can happen at different levels. I think the biggest challenge with noise can be that there are many times that we perceive that ourselves as being in the moment, good listeners, good communicators, but on the outside, we're doing everything right, but on the inside, noise is taken over. So noise can be a physiological noise. It's bodily processes and states that interfere with the message. So think about it. You are in your 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock class, and you are starving. You're so hungry, your stomach's growling, you're worried about other people hearing your stomach growl, and you just can't focus on the lecture. So physiological noise. Sometimes we've been in this situation where our head is pounding. We have a terrible headache. We feel awful, and we're trying to be in the moment and we're trying to listen, but physiologically we have so much interference going on within us. So that's one obstacle. Psychological noise, mental states or emotional states that impede the message transmission or reception. So psychological noise are those distractors we have in our head. Oh, I'm in a lecture class at 8. I'm in class at 8, but I have a very difficult test at 9 that I'm worried about. So I'm trying to be alert and I'm trying to be focused at my 8 o'clock class, but really I'm just freaking out about the test in the next class. So psychological noise. Sometimes we've had a fight with our roommate or our spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend or parents before we go to class. And all of those stressors are in our mind and we're unable to be in the moment and truly listen. And then we have physical noise. So that's something in the sound in the room. I can't hear the speaker very well. There's a physical sound. That light above me is buzzing, and that's all I can focus on. So there's a physical noise issue that's interfering with our ability to be an effective communicator. And then there's cultural noises. These are messages that interfere that results from differences in people's worldview. So it may just be two people from different cultures. They're trying to communicate, but they just have so many differences that obstacles are piling in. Next, I want to talk about feedback. Feedback is an observable response, either verbal or nonverbal, to a message. And there's 3 functions of feedback. And I will tell you this is not in your textbook. This is something that I like, that it's not in your textbook. But I want us to consider this when we are communicating. There's 3 functions of feedback. We have assurance. So that's when you can't necessarily respond verbally, but you're nodding and you're confirming that you have the message, you've received the message. The second is adjustment. So this is when you're having a conversation with someone, maybe they're giving you instructions and you think you understand, but you're like, okay, are you asking me to do this? And you rephrase or you reword or you work the communication to ensure that you're both on the same page. And lastly, it's insight. So you're having a conversation with someone and they're telling you some information. You're like, oh, yes. And let me tell you about what I read about that. And so you're providing your own thoughts and you're taking it a little deeper. So these are the 3 functions of feedback. So next is worldview, and we talked about that just a second ago with cultural noise. So it's the overall framework through which an individual sees and thinks about the world and interprets the world and interacts with it. So there are 5 core components to our worldview. We're not going to go into these today. This is all explained in your textbook, and so I do want you to refer back to the textbook for that. But we're going to move on to our last couple of slides. There are 3 main different types of speeches and speech occasions that you may have. Number 1 is to inform your audience, and this is where you basically just provide basic information to your audience. Occasions for which an informative speech may happen would be to give a report on something to coworkers or to a teacher presenting information to the class. Next, we have the persuasive speech, which gives you the opportunity to share your opinion and your thoughts. And most of us really like to do that, even when not prompted. So a persuasive speech includes something like a sales pitch to a potential customer, or maybe a debate during class or a public forum. And then lastly, we have speeches to commemorate or entertain. And these types of speeches often strengthen the bonds between audience members. And we'll talk about the various types of these as we continue in this semester. So there's a few speaking competencies, and these are things we're just going to list today. And I want you to know that as we go through this semester, we're going to dig a little deeper in each of these speech competencies. Number one, we want to select a topic that's appropriate to the audience and the occasion. And I'll also challenge that to say appropriate for you. I always in this class want you to choose a topic that you're going to be comfortable with. Formulate an introduction that orients the audience to the topic and the speaker. We want to use an effective organizational pattern. This is going to help our audience follow what we say and help us to give a more powerful message. Locate, synthesize, and employ compelling supporting materials. Develop a conclusion that reinforces the thesis and provides psychological closure. Demonstrate a careful choice of words. Effectively use our vocal expressions and paralanguage to engage the audience. Demonstrate nonverbal behaviors that support our message. Successfully adapt the presentation to the audience, skillfully make and use visual aids, and construct an effective, persuasive message with credible evidence and sound reasoning. So as I said, as we continue throughout this textbook, we're going to go through all of these speaking competencies and dig a little deeper to help you to become the most competent and effective speaker that you can be.